I mean, I think we could be overly pessimistic.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to fight against, because it's easy to do.
We had Gabe on, and I think he's more positive about the industry than I generally am, and I quite like that. And he was saying, and I think William said this as well, William Webb, who we had on, it's like this notion the industry's in desperate, straits isn't strictly accurate, because they're all quite profitable. They're all big companies that make money.
Yeah, exactly. It's that. Okay, it's not a 25% growth industry.
It doesn't grow, but it makes money.
It hasn't been for 20 years.
Yeah,
hasn't been for 20 years, but it's a $1 trillion industry.
Yeah.
There's immense amounts of money flowing through.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Telecoms.com podcast, recorded as we always do when we go to Mobile World Congress on the last afternoon on the Wednesday when we're all knackered. We've got a special guest again for the second time running at this event, George Maylim, one of our favourite journalists. How do we define you, George? Just a general?
Available, I think.
George Available Maylim. And actually we're extra grateful. Great though it is to see you anyway, because we did have another guest lined up and they bailed at the last minute, and George is so available that he was able to step in. So I'm really grateful.
Better than saying redundant.
Well, that too.
Yeah. And so, we're just going to... this will probably be slightly shorter than our pods are normally, partly because people have got to fly off to the fly home and all that sort of thing. But we're just going to sort of recap on the whole show, any sort of big themes we took from it. I think what I'd like to start it up, and I'll throw it to you first, George. We were chatting just before we started recording about how a few of us have sort of, I've been working with this theme in my mind of referring to it as Groundhog Day, like, New Year, same old shit sort of thing. I think Ian, you were saying that one of your colleagues has written a sort of sort of smacks of desperation.
I think his headline was something like MWC, this year stinks of desperation.
Yeah. And so I guess what I'd like to start by saying is, yes, it is hard to find really new, novel themes, but I actually think it's no one's fault. I just think the whole industry is quite mature. It's quite hard to innovate. As we've said on previous pods, we've had the voice era of mobile, we've had the mobile data era of mobile. We just don't really know what era we're in now.
Yeah, I think there is innovation going on, and there are kind of new things going on, and there are certainly new they love buzzwords at MWC, and there are certainly new buzzwords this year. So there are different things. The problem with them is that I don't see them being things that will necessarily make a huge difference to the industry's fortunes.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, actually, the more exciting stuff doesn't really even involve telcos. I mean, this show's gone from being a really telecom, event when the big players and the ones making all the noise were Nokia and Ericsson years ago, to, Microsoft having an enormous booth, and AWS, and I mean, one of the companies everybody seems to be talking about this year is NVIDIA.
And they don't even have a booth though.
Did a video with Howard Watson, BT's chief technology officer, earlier, and we just talked about NVIDIA for about 10 minutes.
Wow.
So
well, we'll come back to that because I think it's relevant. I was going to ask George to sort of nominate a sort of particularly prominent buzzword or theme for the year, and we'll drill into that.
It's inevitably AI. I mean, AI with everything, with chips. I'm surprised the restaurants don't have something with AI, but it's that, and that's okay as long as you don't get too carried away, because there's two sides. It's a split personality AI because it's existed for so long. Pierre.
For people just listening to audio, Pierre, the producer, photobombed the pod just there. Sorry, carry
nice.
Yeah.
But AI's been around for decades, so it exists. It's nothing that new, but it hasn't been applied here before, and it's not really applied now. It's new. So ChatGPT, for instance, which everyone is excited about and which has ignited this generation of AI, doesn't really apply to telecoms because the syntax in telecoms is so different.
The only possible application is things like chatbots and.
I mean, it's a call center application really, which is look. There's
as
loads of
core telecoms.
There's loads of money that can be saved and loads of service enhancements that can come through. So I think that's interesting, but it's one for future years rather than actually doing much now. I think I just saw a stat come through before I came here. It's about. It surprised me a little bit. It was from Capgemini. They said 57% of telcos are experimenting with AI. I thought, well, only 57% was the was the shocking thought to that. But then you think, well, does that actually mean they're doing a little bit of summarization in their call center, which is one of the few practical applications, or does it mean they're thinking 5 years ahead to when they can use AI to automate network functions? But I don't know is the short answer, and I don't think anyone else here does.
So Ian, AI, do you agree that that's been the sort of dominant buzzword this year?
Yeah, it has.
Do you
Yeah,
think it's justified?
I kind of agree with George. I don't, it's not like the generative AI stuff's not telecom specific, and you could be at a banking event and they're probably talking about how they're going to use things like Chat GPT to, improve customer services and automate some stuff. Make the job easier for the customer service assistants. And I'm not sure that anybody really wants to expose it to their own customers directly at the moment, because you've got that problem of the chatbot kind of running amok and
hallucinating,
as they call it. But the principles of generative AI, the large language models, the foundation models behind it, can be taken and done for other things. So you have software writing bots now that they use things like GitHub Copilot, which is a Microsoft tool, and I think there's something AWS has got called Code Whisperer that they announced a partnership with BT for recently, where I caught up with a guy called Tariq Amin while I was here. He used to be the Rakuten Mobile and Rakuten Symphony CEO, and he's now doing stuff for Saudi Aramco, but he was very keen on talking about AI, and he's got this view that a lot of the stuff that you used to have to do in coding he was saying something like 80% or 90% of it now can be sort of abstracted away on the coding side. I mean, he was very interesting about it, actually, because he said his advice even to his own kids had changed a little bit. That he was very big on them going into computer science a few years ago, but with this whole, I think the notion is low code, no code, where you don't really need a lot of hardcore computer science expertise to actually be able to manipulate these tools anymore in the future.
My biggest issue with all these, so I get that. I've been hearing sort of similar stuff to you, although I obviously didn't have that conversation with Tariq Amin, about how it's just an incredibly powerful tool and will take care of a lot of the repetitive sort of low skill stuff, so that we can go off and use our higher brains on more lofty matters. My problem always is how much autonomy do you give the AI? So let's say it's doing the code for you. How sure can you be that there isn't going to be some rogue code, or it's not going to go off in a direction that's not useful to you? I still think the AI needs a sort of human pilot. Yeah. So I just wonder, and I'm not about to disagree with someone as experienced and knowledgeable as Tariq Amin, but I just wonder whether...
But he'd probably agree with you on that, because he said he doesn't think... He's not apocalyptic about it. Like, he's got quite an upbeat take on I mean, people who are into technology generally try and see the bright side of it, I think, rather than the downside to it. But he did say he doesn't think there's enough of a debate going on about how it will affect jobs and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, to jump in there, though, the promise of AI is to remove human contact by powering automation of things like network functions. So from that point of view, I think that we have to accept that we have to trust the technology enough to run things. And arguably, this gets to a point where a mission-critical 5G network slice will be instantiated by an AI-led interaction and run and serve this critical service and then shut itself down without anyone really knowing. Yeah. And that's the promise. It's terrifying in a way, though, because I think this could be your family member's life on a remote operating table.
I mean, I'm only ever one conversational step away from going on about Terminator at the best of times. But yeah, when the machines start thinking too much for themselves, I'm not comfortable.
They're not thinking. That's the thing.
Yeah. But that's the direction of travel.
Yeah, but that's within a defined process. So there will be a defined menu of decisions that the system will choose from.
But when people use expressions like decision making, and I think that came up at that TM Forum event we were at, where the Verizon CIO was saying, when we get to sort of level 4 autonomous networks, it's almost a cultural jump that you have to make, that you're persuading people, is it acceptable to let the machines kind of do this decision making?
Totally.
But the decision making's based on, it's not like someone's going, it's a very sort of rudimentary decision. It's looking at a bunch of data and saying the best the best kind of network quality that I need for this particular application is to do this and to do that, and therefore I'm going to make that choice. You're making a series of like mathematical jumps. You're not going, should I go into dentistry or be a tennis
For now,
professional?
but,
it's a much more.
When I mentioned the direction of travel and also the speed of travel, so and I agree. Sort of generative AI seems to me like a very sort of supercharged and natural language adapted search engine.
Yeah.
It's just tapping into this large language model. It's not thinking for itself. I completely concede that, but
It's all pattern recognition. None of it's thinking for itself.
Yeah, I had a go along these lines. There's a app called Perplexity, which is basically a natural language AI-powered search engine that someone said I should have a play with. So before coming on, I asked it what are the key trends at MWC 2024, and it basically scraped the GSMA's website about MWC and said the key trends will be A, B, and C.
Indeed.
But then it had a supplementary underneath, which were the two most popular exhibition stands at MWC 2024, which are Accenture and McKinsey.
Right.
Really?
According to Accenture and
But
McKinsey.
Right.
pretty much. Yeah, but this is the thing. That's not a fact.
No.
But for some reason, the semantics within this this search app have found keywords on those sites that make it think that those two organisations will have the most popular stands, when clearly they don't, because they're not the biggest. I'm not even sure where they are. They could be one of those kind of office suite places that you don't really see when you walk past. And also it begs the question, what happened to PwC if those two are so popular? But I'm not saying they're unpopular consulting people. I appreciate you.
he's available for consulting.
Yes, it's the high availability model again. But I just thought it was interesting to see that this is a lot of this needs to be taken with extreme caution. Because it's in its infancy.
Totally.
And so there is that looking really far ahead, which is that kind of automated AI-powered network, and looking slightly ahead, which is cutting corners in the call center and freeing up people to do more interesting jobs. But there's a path, and we're at the start of the path. So I mean, I think that's why everyone's excited, because it's something new to talk about, and perhaps there isn't much else to talk about because it's as you were saying, it's a continuation of 5G. No earth-shaking innovations, but also no real news looking around. There's been no big acquisitions, unless I've missed something because I've been.
There was today. There was Vodafone flogging Italy.
Yeah, no, I think they're in talks. I'm not sure if they've actually done a deal with.
But I can see that point that there hasn't been big news. Were you about to say something, mate?
I think the sort of deal making is not really an MWC story, though, is there? I mean, people want to hear about products and new generative AI applications, perhaps, that can be used in a network context, or and I think there's been a fair amount of that. As I say, I just don't think it necessarily will move the needle for the industry in the way that they need.
The big challenge we all have, we as communicators, be that journalists or marketing people or analysts or whatever, it's actually really difficult to string a coherent narrative together about the telecoms industry right now. We're in the middle of the supposed 5G cycle, and nothing very exciting has happened in terms of monetization in 5 years. And and each new year, that's where this Groundhog Day concept's been sort of fermenting in my head. Each new year, it feels like you're having the same conversations where they go, "Oh yeah, we're just about to really monetize the fuck out of it," but then you have the same chat again next year. But I think it's just really, ultimately, it's just a really difficult story to tell right now.
But it's never going to change. I don't think that sort of expectancy that. There's something. I mean, the best.
Do you think I'm wrong to even flag it up then?
I just think this expectation that telcos can make some money out of the consumer market. I mean, the problem that telcos have is there's how many mobile phone subscriptions in the world? Probably more than there are, I don't know. I mean, there's parts of the world where people don't own them, but most countries are now at over 100% penetration.
And have been
for years. And it's the same problem that a Netflix will face when everybody in the world's got a Netflix subscription. It's like we don't sell toothbrushes. People have only got a certain amount of disposable income, and prices get pushed down, and they're only ever going to want to spend so much on a mobile phone. Whatever it does, even if it does data, it could do voice data. Let's say there's something else that comes along that you can put on your mobile phone. They'll still only want to spend 20 or 30 quid on that device to the operator that's providing it. And then they maybe pay some money for the applications that go to the application providers.
Unless there was the proverbial killer app that would drive up ARPU and make people want
there are loads of killer apps, but the operators don't make money from them. Uber's a killer app.
That's a good point.
You know, there's loads of killer apps.
Yeah,
that's
that
not
would
the
be
problem.
my concern as well. But, you know, it's all about low latency video, and again, after God knows how long we've been talking about low latency video, and I don't get it because I don't play low latency games, so I don't understand.
Well, and if you did, you wouldn't do it over a 5G network either.
Exactly, and then you think, well, who's making money out of that? Well, it's the people who create the games. It's not the operators. So again, even if there was another killer app that landed, it's probably not going to change the needle for the operators and their revenue.
That brings up another theme of the event, I think, because that directly ties into the whole network API story, which is still very nascent. But there's this. Last year, it was, I think, it was
last year they launched Kamara, was it?
They did. No, Kamara was already in existence, but they launched Open Gateway, which is taking advantage of Kamara. Kamara being this sort of project to standardize interfaces that are northbound, so between the network and the applications, have something that everybody agrees on. The idea being that an application developer can come along and write once for the whole industry instead of having to do something different for each and every network. The uncertainty about, and pretty much anybody I've talked to about this on the commercial side at telcos says the same thing. They're like, we just really don't know yet. They don't even know about, I mean, already there's a worry that some of the money is actually going to not go to the operators, it's going to go to the internet platforms. AWS is doing what Vonage is doing in terms of setting up a storefront kind of arrangement, a platform, a CPaaS platform or network platform as a service, or whatever you're going to call it. But that's the interface with the application developers. It's better for them to go to that and then be able to access a community of operators potentially than go and deal with each and every operator separately on a commercial basis and have to do multiple transactions, because you might have got rid of the technical differences, but you've still got that kind of commercial nightmare there. And none of that's really been sort of figured out. And the other thing that hasn't been figured out is, will these companies really pay a lot of money for access to these network features, these APIs? How monetizable are they?
Because it's still not that obvious to me what these whizzy new features are.
Well, they're things like, the problem is that they don't sound that whizzy to a lot of people. They wouldn't really excite a lot of people, and they can be done in other ways. So one that often gets talked about is location. So a bank wanting to pinpoint its customer's location for fraud purposes. Are they out of the country at the moment, and therefore why is a signal they're doing this? But you can do things like that with GPS. I've heard they think it's less costly to do with their technology than using GPS, but it's not incredibly strong as a
No, and then you get other ones that are just like high reliability, and as I'm sure you said before on the pod, you're like, well, if that's the USP, then what does that say about the current reliability?
The quality on demand one, I've got a real issue with. You pay for your low latency slice, and that gives you the opportunity to go off gaming, and you're not going to get killed in Fortnite, because the implication is saying you can buy a quality service is, well, you say my service isn't good quality otherwise. And we've been talking all this time about how 5G is going to be much better quality than 4G and it's going to sort all these problems out. And now they're trying to make some money out of pushing this APIs notion on the world. It's a bit, and I totally agree with Mike's headline on that sort of basis. It's quite desperate, I think, the whole API
so why do you think 5G Red Cap comes in?
Oh God! I mean, I haven't even looked at that properly. That's the successor
I think it's good. I think
MBIOT,
it's a neat idea,
isn't it? But
I haven't given it that much thought. Why don't you tell me why you think it's a good idea?
Well, because it makes 5G cheap enough for IoT applications, some IoT applications. So you get some of the
Red Cap is reduced
capability.
Yeah.
Which we all are suffering on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah.
So it's not. I thought it was a red hat. I was thinking, why have they called it Red Cap?
Right.
For years, until I finally found out. But
some new competitor to Red Hat.
Yeah. I thought it was like, this is some offshoot.
Yeah, exactly.
Once I understood what it was, and you find that there's 5G is too expensive for a lot of IoT devices and IoT applications.
Yeah.
But they would quite like the low latency elements of it, so it can be basically cut down into a lower power.
Yeah.
Lower power and lower cost than full 5G, but providing the low latency.
I see. So
to
that's how it's
IoT
different
apps.
from precursors like MBIoT and that
Yeah,
sort of thing.
MWC is quite low bandwidth, so you'll get a lot more
Okay.
capacity with RedCap.
So RedCap,
but
you get
at
more
a-
capacity,
at, an,
right.
at an affordable price
I
for
see.
IoT. So don't forget with IoT, there's going to be billions of devices, and there are billions of devices already. So that's something that actually weirdly there's been hardly any IoT here, which is interesting.
It's been very muted, I think. Yeah.
Which is odd considering there's now more choice than ever, because there's not only MBIoT, there's Cat 1 Bis, which is another lightweight version of LTE in this scenario, and then 5G RedCap in addition to
LoRa?
5. LoRa is not a cellular
okay.
technology, but yeah, so you've got more choice than ever. But you would think with certainly three distinct cellular flavors of connectivity and literally billions of endpoints coming, that would be one way that the monetization debate would be talked about. But I've seen very little this year.
I think they don't want to overdo it as they have in the past, because we had all those Cisco forecasts
always.
coming out, didn't we? Oh, there'd be 20 billion connected devices by
Yes.
2016, and it never really worked out.
And how can you be 90% out year after year in terms
and
of
no
volume?
one's ever made any money out of it.
No.
It's a problem. I mean, the companies that have made money out of it have tended to be some of the startups maybe.
Yep.
But for an operator making 30 quid from each subscriber every month, it just doesn't move the needle enough.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of coming for £1 a year
Yeah.
for a connected sensor in a water tank is $1 a year.
I actually wonder whether Vodafone's IoT business could start to look interesting, because they've done this deal with Microsoft Azure, and the one element of that hasn't been talked about as much as the AI side of it and the cloud side of it is Microsoft becoming an investor in the IoT business.
Yep.
I mean, that's basically being spun out and set up as a standalone thing, and Microsoft becomes an investor. You sort of think that maybe that's going to start doing things if it can take advantage of some of the stuff you were talking about, George, like RedCap, and
Yep.
might be worth watching. But they don't want to go on about it because they've done it in the past on IoT.
Yeah,
I
and
think.
it's a long way from being a big money thing. I mean, part of the conversation here is that operators struggle to make money out of the average consumer, so they're turning back to the enterprise to see what they can resell as part of a B2B2C ecosystem play with the operator using its financial relationship really with enterprises to underpin new revenues from that. So I think the issue is by doing that, it's great for AWS or Google or Azure to have an operator being the service provider, because they will then provide service, which is the one thing the web scalers don't do. They'll also provide easy payment terms, because the web scalers don't do that either. If Amazon want paying immediately,
right.
BT will be net 30 or net 60 for the bill. So the operator actually might find that its point of differentiation is it provides a month of financing.
A degree of financing. That's the broader irony. Sometimes of this show, we nearly always end up talking about where's the money.
Yeah.
There's all this investment in new generations, in new technologies, all that sort of thing. Where's the ROI? And yet you look at this show. I mean, I think it's back to pretty much like it's pomp pre-pandemic, and so it's certainly trying to get from A to B in this place. God damn, I nearly lose my rag just bumping into people and all that sort of thing. So it's really rammed. There's obviously tons of money sloshing around. It's just not obvious how people are making it, especially within the telecoms world.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could be overly pessimistic.
Yeah, that's
though,
what I'm
because
trying to fight against, because it's easy to do.
we had Gabe on, and I think he's more positive about the
Yeah, he
industry than
is.
I generally am, and I quite like that. And he was saying, and I think William said this as well, William Webb, who we had on, it's like this notion the industry's in desperate straits isn't strictly accurate, because they're all quite profitable. They're all big companies that make money.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's that. Okay, it's not a 25% growth industry.
It doesn't
anymore.
grow, but it
Hasn't
makes
been for-
money.
hasn't
They still
been
make
for
plenty
20
money.
years.
Yeah.
Hasn't been for 20 years, but it's a $1 trillion industry.
Yeah.
There's immense amounts of money flowing through it.
Now, I guess the telcos themselves would probably stand there and say, the European ones would go, well, hang on a minute, we are profitable, but in the long term, we're not covering our what is it, the metric that they use, the return on capital employed.
Yep.
And that means you stop investing after a while, and and we fall further behind China and America. That's the old story, isn't it, on 5G?
Yep.
And I think they've probably got some point there, but I think what that needs is, and this is where I'm a little bit sympathetic towards their moaning at regulators, that this sort of intervention that happens all the time to prevent any M&A activity and this kind of hard line on being against consolidation, I think maybe needs to be relaxed a bit. And as a consumer, you don't kind of want that. You want the competition there, obviously, but...
While you're on that, Ian, you attended a press conference that 4 operators did at once.
So it was.
Just tell us about that.
And it was kind of unannounced, really. It turned up on the agenda at the last minute, and I got word of it. Oh, you should go to this because it's the CEOs of the 4 big European telco groups on stage for the first time ever. You know, it's like pitched as it's like De Niro, Pacino
was
in a
really
movie scene for the first time.
Yeah.
You know, and
is that legal?
What?
Cartel.
Well, yeah.
I guess it depends how collaborative they're being.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. You're sort of thinking, are they going to announce some big plan to do some kind of JV? And then obviously that's a concern. And then I thought, well, they probably aren't. So what are they going to do? Guess what they did? They had a moan.
They had a moan about regulation.
I mean, just to be clear, it was Deutsche Telekom, so Timothée Högers, Orange, Crystal Heidemann, Telefonica, so I think it's Jose Maria Alvarez Payete. Lopez.
Nicely done.
I think it's his full name. It's
smooth.
Mateus as well. I thought he was on.
And then
who
am I forgetting? Oh, Margarita Della Valle from Vodafone. So, and I thought that's where I really kind of go along with Mike's sort of desperation headline. That you look at their combined salaries. There's a vast amount of money being earned between those 4 CEOs, and you think, what are you doing to justify that? You're standing up on stage and saying, and this is a contradiction as well. They don't want regulation, but they do want regulation. They don't want the regulators to get involved and keep preventing them from merging, but they want the regulators to intervene and force internet companies to contribute to network costs because they've got this sort of sob story about, they're using our pipes and it's all very one-sided, and totally overlooking the fact that nobody would bother getting a broadband connection if it wasn't for internet applications in the first place.
Well, quite.
But, it's just a bit sad, really. You sort of, I actually half hope they do something like get up and talk a bit more about the network APIs side of things, because even though I'm sceptical
something
of that,
a bit more positive and innovative,
at least it's a chance to try and do something.
Handouts and charity.
Yeah.
We had a couple of dinners while we've been here. I won't even name them because they were off the record, and if I happen to say something now, I don't want to risk abusing their confidentiality. But one of them I was chatting to, and I was going, this fair contribution stuff, you just want to shut the fuck up about that. It just makes you sound weak, it makes you sound desperate. And furthermore, it's, as we've gone over loads of times on the pod, it's actually quite hard to justify in a sort of empirical, measurable way. And that person agreed, but they said, I'll tell you what they could do, regulation-wise, is insist that the big streamers, the big producers of all this data, do a better job on compression.
Well, that's why I like the, I can mention this because this was on record, but I went to an event at BT Tower. BT Tower now sold, depressingly, to become a hotel.
It's going to be a hotel.
But when I went, this was only a few weeks ago as well, there was no talk of that obviously at the time, but they were showing off this technology called Maud that they've kind of developed in-house, which is very much about compression. And I don't understand how it works, it's quite complicated, but you can basically put a lot of traffic for things like live sports, which is the one that has the big impact, I think, on terms of peak traffic levels. You can use it to address that and make things a lot more efficient and reduce.
That's right.
So the costs are quite high in terms of the overall impact on the industry, I think Howard Watson was saying. And I think something like that's a better way of kind of trying to deal with these things, working with the companies on things like caching of content and, maybe, there's... They do make a lot of investments there anyway, the likes of Netflix, on putting their services closer to the customer, so that you don't have to sort of...
But this person I've chatted to seemed to reckon they could do more, and seemed to think that there might be a role for regulation for them to just insist. That's the sort of thing that the EU is good at, is telling big yank companies to behave themselves.
Yeah.
So
it's very true the point they make that they're lightly regulated compared to the telcos. I kind of get that grievance to some extent.
I get that too.
And we have allowed big tech to develop into big tech without giving it much oversight for a long time. But the regulators have been behind the curve. I mean, deals like Facebook buying WhatsApp and Instagram, I think, are good examples of that, because no one really knew what was going on.
The special pleading on looser regulation, I got no problem with. I got no problem with if Europe suddenly decided that it's fine with there just being 3 MNOs in a given country, without the need to make all these, to create a new fourth one, I think I'd be fine with all that. Actually, I've got a question for you, George, as you're a well-travelled man. I was chatting to someone, at the start of the show from Australia, and they're saying they have much higher ARPU of a sort of American kind of level. One thing that does seem to be distinctive about Europe, and tell me if you disagree, is that our ARPU seems to be very low among developed nations. And I was wondering if you agree with that, and what, if anything, could be done about it.
I mean, I don't have experience about Australia, but I do in New Zealand, and I would estimate that, no, it was roughly the same, for fibre connection was roughly the same. Mobile phone may have been slightly more expensive, like maybe 20% more expensive.
Than here, or than Europe?
Than the UK, yeah,
right.
Specifically.
Okay, so they on the whole, you're saying their ARPU wasn't appreciabably higher, or a
But then,
magnitude higher?
part of the difference, though, is that New Zealand's model is very similar to a European model. I mean, it's much more tightly aligned to the UK than Australia from that point of view.
Oh, okay.
So for instance, the man who separated BT into BT Openreach was previously the CEO of Telecom New Zealand and did the functional separation in New Zealand as almost like a trial run. The Kiwis won't like that, but actually they will, because they were first. But they won't like being the guinea pig as part of a wider plan. But yeah, so they've got competition in the same way. So there's 3 or 4 providers in New Zealand, which would be, it's aligned, isn't it? Where there's 2 or 3 providers, you've got competitive pressure on prices.
So, yeah, that kind of feeds what I was just trying to mull over, whether there's something about the regulatory and the competitive environment in Europe that means it's harder for these European operators that feel compelled to do all this special pleading the whole time to make money, as opposed to AT&T or whatever.
I think there's a real cultural issue as well as regulatory. This idea of being telco grade versus best effort. So you'd have, Amazon, Azure, whoever, they can launch a service and they won't do any testing. They'll just put it up there, and if it doesn't work, the customer will go to the service provider and say it doesn't work, and that'll be their problem, and Amazon won't touch it. Whereas if you have any of the telcos touching it, they'll test it. It'll take ages to get to market. They'll put themselves between the service provider and the customer, and have to handle all of that. And so it's clunky. And so this attitude of being telco grade, sure, gives great service to customers, but it makes them slow, makes the services costly. And I think that perhaps it's time to allow that to retire a bit, because this isn't engineering telecoms networks. This is just making an app available in your exchange or platform or whatever people are calling it. So I think there's a cultural shift, which is probably going to happen as people retire and leave the industry, which is one issue with. From a network engineering point of view, there won't be enough people potentially able to keep the networks up and running when people retire, particularly the older ones. But once those guys are gone, we're in a best effort web world with telco grade, which is enabled by telco grade networks. But the services that the telcos provide over those telco grade networks don't have to be telco grade. They can just be best effort internet services. And I think that certainly impedes profitability of new services, but I think it impedes competition and time to market as well. So perhaps there needs to be some change culturally alongside the regulations also. No, that is a good point. And then how you do that change is another matter. It's pretty difficult. I was at a dinner, and again, I can't say who it was, but it's the CEO of a telco in the Middle East region, and he said, well, the thing is, you get there and you look at your people and you say, the people will have to change, or the people will have to change.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
It's what the guy said, and it's obvious that that's kind of necessary, because the technologies are different, the services are different, and this future will be different. I don't think we'll get back to 20% growth and enormous margins. I think that ship sailed a very long time ago, and I think we need to not be wistfully imagining that it could be 1999 all over again, and realise that this is a strong infrastructure business and as long as it can get to that return on investment over time, figure that's acceptable, so the borrowing can be supported by the profitability.
Yeah, it just needs a few percentage
and
points.
a small, exactly,
a few percentage
2-3%
points,
margin
sort
on
out some of the
that,
cost issues. I mean, things are becoming more automated. That's going to help, I think.
That's one of the reasons the 5G narrative has been tricky, because a lot of the benefits of 5G are really boring, like plumbing efficiencies and that sort of thing, which aren't boring, like, to the bottom line.
Yeah, I think the
But
problem
they're hard
with
to
5G
get
is
excited about.
the pitching of it as a thing that consumers should give a shit about.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
totally.
There's nothing really wrong with having releases that the standards bodies come out with that make the underlying technology better, and it does. It makes it better. It improves it in various ways, but it's not something you can package up and sell as a shiny new thing to consumers.
Terrible marketing mistake.
Yeah.
2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. Terrible marketing mistake.
Totally.
Where does it stop? 27G?
Completely. It's just a stupid idea.
Also, if you think about it, and I'm pretty sure I've sort of mulled this over on the pod recently, but we didn't really. 1G, 2G were sort of named retrospectively.
Yep.
The G's kind of kicked in with 3G.
I did see GPRS on an advert on the back of a bus.
Well, this is when it started to go wrong. Is with, and I remember being at a consulting firm at the time, and 3G was being bandied around, and I said to the guy who's still in the industry now and a really smart telecom consultant, what a consumer's going to make of this? And he went, well, I don't think they're going to use 3G in marketing, that expression. They'll do something else. And they did.
They did.
One company named themselves after it, for Christ's sake, and it's still called that now.
It seemed a particularly myopic thing to do. I mean, and then, so that established the precedent, and it coincided with a lot of other hype, like the dot-com bubble.
Yep.
So there's a hell of a sort of speculative boom around that. And then 4G came along a decade later, and just by those two things, the industry seems to have decided, right, well, we're going to have a new G every decade, and we're going to have a massive investment cycle with each G in, and loads of hype, and it's all going to be great. But already, by the time we got to 5G, we realised that's not happening.
Yeah.
My assertion is increasingly that we should just can the whole fucking concept of Gs.
Yeah.
There shouldn't even be a 6G. I know I'm not the first person to say it. There shouldn't even be a 6G.
Well, this is actually what quite a few of the operators are now saying. The ones in NGMN, which I has been criticised by Interdigital, a dinner I was at, on the record, as overly conservative. They're obviously very much trying to push the G still because they make money. They make money that way. But the NGMN operators, which include a lot of the big ones in Europe, and I think the Japanese ones are quite prominent in that, aren't they? Where NTT Docomo is. The whole message coming out of that, and you can talk to Howard Watson at BT about this on the record, is that it should be as software upgradable as possible. It shouldn't be a big hardware swap of the kind that they had to do with 4G.
But that was the story. The story was after LTE 4G, it was supposed to be a software upgradable situation from there on in.
Yeah, but I think that was vendors trying to make out that they had some kind of edge over their rivals, and it was easy to go with their technology than others. What actually happened was a huge amount of money got spent on new and expensive radio units, and there were a lot of new boxes kind of built out. And I was talking to him on the video I did with him earlier today about this, that what they really want with 6G is that you're sort of addressing bits and pieces as and when you need to, and you're not having to go over the whole network and take.
So it's not really a G. It's an incremental.
And they wouldn't want it pitched that way, I don't think. And the problem is that, as you say, I think the G's, it's lost its luster if it ever had it. It might have done in the 3G days. People actually were interested.
And I still think 4G was a big deal in terms of proper mobile internet.
I think it was, but I'm not sure that the 4G side of it. I mean, you tell people what it can do and explain to them what does this mean, and it's better mobile internet on your phone. That's the way to do it, really.
Yeah.
Call it what it is, but just bandying around these terms, because the first thing your dad's going to say is, what's 4G? What's 5G? What's 6G? Why don't you just say it's mobile internet at high speed or something? I mean, there's got to be a better label you can apply than 4G to it.
Well, then that gets back to the other problem with the Gs. What if your normie relative goes, what's 5G? I mean,
Well, they can't explain that one.
We rely on being able to communicate about telecoms industry to pay our bills, but I still struggle to articulate what 5G is.
But what it is really is just an incremental improvement, to be honest. I mean, there are things in the plumbing that are bigger than that, to do with going to cloud native, network functions and these things that get lumped in with it, and being able to have a standalone core that will support things like network slicing, which is potentially important and useful. It could be. I'm not saying it's a big monetization thing, but in terms of the architecture of the network, a lot of this stuff could really matter. But they're not things that are that you see at the front end as a consumer that anybody's ever going to care about. The lights keep going.
The lights keep going off and on. Can you chuck us another beer while we have that natural break?
We didn't say anything mean about anyone, did we? For the lights to be going.
No. No.
George, how are you doing on the beer front?
Yeah, I'm close to the end.
Right, here you are.
This one's got a dent in it. Is it going to explode when I open it?
It was like that. It was like that in the store, so I didn't drop it.
We're good. We're good.
It's done cautiously.
So yeah, I think, and I actually increasingly think the Gs. You kind of just alluded to this a minute ago, Ian. The Gs are less about operators; they're more about big kit vendors.
Yeah.
Because someone like Ericsson, they really want this regular upgrade cycle, don't they?
Yeah, they're in a complete cycle. I remember when I went to the launch of 3G at Ericsson, and it was a long time before 3G came out. They had this event called Blue Sky Thinking, and I think it was in 1999 or 2000. We were in Kista, in their main place in Stockholm. And I was, in those days I used to smoke, so I was having a cigarette outside talking to an engineer, and I said, so what happens in that building? He goes, that's the 4G building. And I thought he was joking. So I laughed, and he goes, yeah, and this one is 5G. So they're on a 15-year cycle that, so those buildings will have switched back to the next G and they'll continue going, and it's a hell of a beast to feed.
Yeah.
But innovation's expensive, as we all know. But
they're in the most, in some ways, they're in the most precarious position because they made this big bet on network APIs that certainly hasn't paid off yet, and may never, at least to the extent that they paid for Vonage. I think that's where I feel the real pressure is. I think we can all agree that we lack a bit of sympathy for the European operators when they do their special pleading, but they're all right.
I actually think the equipment side of it's more worrying at the moment than the telco side of it.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, I was chatting to someone, and again, I think this is off the record and on background, so I'll say who it is.
Yeah.
But that was their point: is that you don't want the likes of Nokia to kind of go under. Now, I know there has been speculation because it's lost this contract in America with AT&T recently. It had already lost business with Verizon, and it's had its struggles.
But they're smashing it in Germany, aren't they, mate?
I mean, no, unfortunately, not enough for it to make a difference. And there's these huge layoffs that are happening. And a few years ago, Ericsson was in quite bad shape before they changed management. They came in, but even since then, neither of them have been. The margins are pretty thin. They don't do brilliantly, and you don't want, in a market where there's only really 3 or 4 companies that do this stuff, that's critical network infrastructure. You don't want one of them going under. It's
especially with the scale involved. You see, this is the problem.
Exactly.
It's not 25 kettles.
So it's really pretty frightening. You think about them, people don't know these companies anymore. This is another one of the problems. Like, normal people don't know. A mate's dad was saying to me, why were you in Finland recently? I was like, I went to Nokia's R&D facilities, and his response was, Nokia, they still around then?
Yeah.
And I went, well, you wouldn't be able to do any broadband in the UK if it weren't for them.
But I mean, the only thing I'll say is no one. There's no reason for people who don't do our job or something similar to us to have heard of networking vendors at all.
No, but they are incredibly important companies in the same way that a TSMC wouldn't be known to the wider world, but it's of vital importance. Or ASML in the Netherlands, these kinds of organisations that just aren't consumer brands, but you take them out and society changes overnight almost.
This brings me on to another buzzword that I want to ask about, which is Open RAN. I just did a panel with a vendor. I won't name them, but it's not. It was all recorded. It was on the record. But just in case I say anything indiscreet, and it's basically all about future-proofing. It was about the investments you make in Open RAN kit now will sort of future-proof a network and provide all this software upgradability and all that sort of thing. And it just made me think.
That's bullshit.
Well, do elaborate in a sec. But it just made me think if it wasn't bullshit, then this future-proofing is also making the margins for networking vendors smaller as time goes on, because then you do get that true software upgradability. But why is it bullshit?
I don't think it's future-proofing, because hardware still wears down and needs replacing. So you still have to change out your hardware at some point.
Aren't they softwareizing more and more of the hardware?
Yeah, but there's still, you can't turn radio units into thin air. You know, you still have to have
Yeah.
radio units. You still have to have equipment.
have a cell tower,
You know,
you
you
know.
can upload. So you can change it. The idea with Open RAN to some extent is, and Telus talked about this on record, that they were on the call when they did the deal with Samsung a few weeks ago, and I chatted to them, and the two companies were there, Telus and Samsung, and the guy from Telus went, if at some point in the future we want to move from Samsung to somebody else, the idea is keep the baseband products there and just put somebody else's software on it. And they've gone with this Intel architecture that they think makes that a bit easier. I'm not going to go into that whole look-aside inline thing again because we do that to death. But that was his point, and I go along with that. And there's the idea that you can. I mean, this is the AT&T argument about the Ericsson deal. Is that okay? It's kind of very, very heavily reliant on Ericsson, but if something happened in the future, they would be able to take it out and put somebody else in more easily than in the past, where it's a whole truck roll. You take the whole system out, you know, and you have to sort of bring a whole new system in.
Bits and bobs.
You can swap bits and bobs, exactly. And I kind of get that, I suppose, to some extent. But the best thing that someone said to me on Open RAN while I've been here was actually Orange's newish CTO, Bruno Zabib, who I met this morning. And it was very much on the structure of the market, and are we going to a place where the whole idea of Open RAN when it came around a few years ago was to really sort of buoy specialists and make it easier for some radio unit vendor to kind of get into the mix with guys that did the baseband software and the other components, and it didn't have to bring everything along in order to be able to have a deal with an operator in the first place. You know, you could sort of fit in, and then, you know, we bring competition to the market that way because it's much easier to do it that way than it is to build a new Ericsson from scratch. And yet what's actually happening is that all the Open RAN business now seems to be going the way of the big companies, whether it's Ericsson, Nokia, or, I mean, the big winner really from Open RAN's been Samsung, but Samsung was already an extremely large company with the resources to invest in doing everything it wanted. I mean, they're not a radio access network specialist. They tick all the kind of boxes, and they've been the big winner for Open RAN. So I put this point to Bruno, and he was like, yeah, and you know, on this kind of market concentration issue and whether you're going to get enough vendors in for it to really make a difference. He said something like, "It's no good having a democracy if there's only one candidate," which I thought was quite a good way of putting it. It's almost he's given me a sort of headline for next week, you know, at some point. But
almost in that that Ford quote. It can have
exactly. Yeah.
Have you had, has Open RAN been a big theme for you this year?
Not really. I feel that a lot of the driver behind it was trying to deal with the exclusion of the Chinese from the US. And the idea being that some very small companies could kind of compete for business from Western operators where the Chinese were barred. I think that was a lot of the momentum behind the concept. That's going to take such a long time, you know, to get any degree of choice. You know, like you said, there's only one candidate in the election, there's two, but but it's not the whole. You know, it's not like a mad. Some Tory guy's been caught doing something disgusting, and then there's a by-election, and you get 12 different people from, you know, the monster raving loonies through to, you know, the new fascists, or, you know, whoever they are.
Some Tory guy's been caught doing something disgusting. I mean, it does happen. I can't fault your analogy.
About every 2 weeks. There's another one coming. You know, he said for only £4,000 a month, he'd ask any question you'd like. This guy from Blackpool South.
Right.
Apparently.
Interesting. So,
Sorry, I digressed.
I know. I'm trying to get back on the thread. I'm just thinking about pervy Tories now.
I think there's been quite a lot of, because it's a bit of an interest of mine, I think there's been quite a lot going on the kind of in the weeds side on Open RAN at the show. If you because I met Samsung, and some of the stuff they're doing is really, really interesting. I mean, I need to go through my notes. I haven't written anything on it yet. It was like 2 hours ago, but I was really impressed with the kind of range of options they have, and how much of an effort they've kind of made on trying to work with different vendors and prove that sort of interoperability thing. You know, maybe because you always try and be skeptical as a journalist about this stuff, but you know, it's like they were pretty convincing, I thought. And you know, there's lots happening on. One thing that I've always I mean, we talked about it loads, Scott, in the past, is this sort of heavy reliance on one GPP vendor, one general purpose processor vendor, Intel. But that's now starting to change. There's like more talk about ARM as an alternative.
And talking about ARM, there was that thing that we both published on the Monday about this new AI alliance that seems to be led largely by sort of ARM and NVIDIA.
Yeah, I mean, NVIDIA is a big figure in that, really, I think.
Yeah.
But that's intriguing, and a few people are talking about that. I mean, that's again, that's something Bruno was talking about, and Howard at BT. This idea of we're now past the stage where generative AI has been about the hyperscalers, purchasing GPUs from NVIDIA and putting them in their big data centers to do training of large language models. People are now starting to think about, the term is AI inference, where the large language model's kind of locked down and you're kind of feeding live data into it, but you're not training it anymore, and it requires far less compute resources. So you could potentially see opportunities to use it put AI applications basically closer to the edge of the network. And this is to some extent what NVIDIA's talking about. I mean, for them, clearly, it's where do we go after the hyperscalers?
Yeah, who do we flog
it to? So they've got a vested interest in talking this up, but there is an idea that you could build out GPUs at the edge of a telco network, for instance, and use it for applications where you need things like very low latency, what we were talking about earlier. And also use those GPUs to do some other things like RAN processing. So this gets into the open cloud RAN story. Using it for acceleration of layer 1 functions, and it's interesting. It's expensive. A lot of people say that's the downside. I mean, the AI application side of it, that kind of use case really has to add up, I think, to justify it, just to justify the economics. But it's kind of, I don't know. It almost puts a bit of oomph back into that whole edge computing story, I think.
Right. Well, I think
could do.
I think that's one of the main reasons that AI was a dominant theme this year. Is basically a lot of what we've already been discussing is that it's really hard to generate buzz around telecoms. It's really hard to generate a clear, coherent narrative about the direction of travel and growth and all that sort of thing. So when something comes along that's kind of adjacent, but is really buzzy, you just think, fuck it, that'll do.
Because actually the truth of it is they should have had continued incremental efficiency gains in mobile data.
Yeah.
That's the
narrative,
really, that I'm taking from the show.
Totally, and it'll be the same next year.
Yes.
And so on.
Guys, is there a statement we can make to the organisers? Because last year we made some statements about the size of the press room.
Yeah.
And it's much larger press room.
Yeah,
I'm wondering if we can make some statement that might enhance the show for next year.
I think the press room is better than it was last year, but it still smacks of we don't really give a shit about the press, except for Mobile World Live, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, Mobile Live.
But you were saying you wanted sandwiches and a bar.
I want sandwiches. I want free booze. I want to have a neck massage at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
I was just before I came here, I bumped into Lara, I think heads up the marketing and comms for GSMA, and she sort of went, what do you think of the press area this year? And she was obviously thinking, you slagged it off last year, didn't you?
Yeah.
And I said, it is definitely a lot better. But I'll take that point, and Lara, if you're listening, just put on a bit of catering for us. Give us a bit of love.
There's not even a facility to get a coffee around here.
Well, there is. There's just one coffee machine, though.
Once, okay, so
two.
I'm still going to go along with there's not really a facility to get a coffee. I mean, there could, you go to events like one. Okay, so I'm going to throw a comparison to the mix, which is the TM Forum event in Copenhagen. I think they did a much better job.
Certainly
they put on a proper spread for food, and
this is true.
They actually seem to feel that they need to care about the press at that event, and need to engage with them, and need to at least give them a working environment.
I have to say it is easier for them though, because there are, it's not thousands.
It's not thousands,
people.
I know, but these guys aren't short of money. They're the only people doing well out of telecom.
That's not true. I heard that apparently fibre rollout people are doing really well. I got told that.
Okay, all right, them and the GSMO.
but then equally, there was somebody they have to be nameless, unfortunately, but they've rented one of those meeting rooms
Right.
over in, I can't remember, was it the arse end of Hall 6 or somewhere like that? You know, these.
Even they're not cheap.
No, but the thing is, these guys are really onto it. They found out that you had to rent the furniture as well, and they said, "Well, I have no furniture, thanks."
Yeah.
They go to IKEA. They literally buy their furniture in
Right.
IKEA, assemble it, and leave it, and it's cheaper than renting
Well,
the furniture.
that was where I think, and I'm sure I've said this before, I think sometimes the GSMA doesn't do itself any favours by appearing to be as profiteering as...
It feels like a gouge, doesn't it?
It feels like a bit of a gouge, and you know, they make tons of money, and I know they had a nightmare during the pandemic and they had to lay people off, and you know, no one was happy about that. But I just think, yeah, to a point we were making, and this
It might be standard event stuff, though, that you do charge $2,500 to rent a big screen. That might just be what
I
Fira
imagine so.
charges.
Yeah, we could ask our colleagues at Informa; they'd
Yeah.
know. But you know, and having started off this pod denouncing the operators for their special pleading, I'm now launching into special pleading on behalf of journalists and saying that we need more sandwiches and coffee and cans of Coke
Free food and drink.
or beers. God, can you imagine? If there was a
Yeah,
beer
but I mean,
fridge,
it is the
that could
utility-
go horribly wrong.
But there's a serious point here. I think, especially for the mid-market vendors, that they spend such a disproportionate amount of their annual marketing budget coming
Yeah.
to an event like this that they really need the event to work. And I don't know what working looks like. You know,
Indeed.
is it a sale? Is it a contract, or whatever? But when you think about how much they could buy on your property, your brands. And the brands that I work for is insane. You know, the amount of coverage and advertorials and advertising and events, niche events that they could support compared to just one big hit. It's an interesting value proposition consideration.
Yeah, the scale of this place, you know, and it's been rammed this year, and even like towards the end of the third day, which we're at now, I was still doing sort of human dodgems just getting here.
Yeah.
So it's an incredible thing, and actually I will say that I don't know why this year especially I just really reflected on how cool it is socially, how cool it is, well, vocationally, socially. So all of us who have this common professional interest all get together this one time. We go out in the evening. I'm certainly feeling the pace now.
Oh, I definitely think there's a place for it. You know, I know I've said it's expensive, but good things do cost money.
Yeah.
But it's great to be back at full strength. I think we're back at full strength.
Yeah, it feels like that.
In terms of attendance.
Well, I don't know what the figure. I don't know if they've put a figure out this year for
It's
what
more
the,
than
what the
last year,
attendance
for
is.
sure.
I know that they were expecting 95, is what they
Right.
what they said before.
So I think the peak was about just over 110.
Around
Something
the
like
peak was
100,
about
yeah.
109
Yeah.
in 2019.
It wouldn't surprise me if they hit 100 this time.
That
The
wouldn't
thing
surprise me.
I find very strange about it, though, is it's a real sort of disconnect with the real world, isn't it? You know, you come to this event and the numbers since the pandemic have been, you know, going back up again towards the sort of 2019 level, and yet the number of people who actually work in telecoms going down all the time quite dramatically. And you sort of think, who are all these
Who
people?
are all these people?
Well, I think this is the thing about, you know, one thing we maybe haven't talked about as a theme so much is the advance of other companies into telecoms.
Yeah.
Never going to die.
You touched on it earlier, but it's a good point.
You know, it's who operates the networks and who does it all, really, rather than it's not telecom itself's not going to die. We're all still going to have networks, but is it going to be the guys that do it today, or is it going to be private equity players doing fibre, or is it going to be hyperscalers competing against? I mean, Microsoft's now selling. One thing I wrote about at the start of the week, or maybe it was even before the show started, was this deal with Etisalat in the UAE, where they're providing. It's stuff that they acquired with that takeover of Affirm Networks and Metaswitch, where they're doing the core network technology. They're a direct competitor to Ericsson and Nokia in that market now. And then now there's talk about. I mean, I met Samsung earlier. They were showing me this. Graviton chip. That's AWS's chip, basically.
Yeah.
It's like an outpost server that you run radio access network software on. So you basically have AWS setting up edge facilities, and Samsung comes along and slaps its vRAN software on the top, and there's a much bigger role there. And then there's a sort of diminution of what people like Ericsson and Nokia were doing in the past. And the same on the telco side. They're not the guys doing the applications anymore. The only application used to be voice, obviously. That it's other companies doing it. They're selling off assets to try and deal with the problems they have, but the networks are still going to be there. It's just going to be different owners, and I think that's when you start to have to get a bit concerned that if it's all going to be hyperscalers, you know, we don't want a world. I don't want a world where every single network in every country is underpinned by Microsoft in a way. It's, you know, I'm not sure that's a healthy thing.
All of that feels dodgy. From, you know, there's a security aspect to this as well.
Yeah.
If it's all the same stuff, it's all going to get wiped out by the same attack.
Yeah.
But you know, this variety's always been good for any ecosystem, because also it helps with innovation as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't want a homogenized two-vendor landscape, because this event won't exist unless the two vendors will take 3 whole halls each.
Well, this is the weird thing. This gets back to the Open RAN, that everybody's so worried about having 2 or 3 vendors in the radio access network. I think Scott and I have talked about this a bunch of times. It's like, well, far more worrying to me is having 3 big hyperscalers doing public cloud that is basically underpinning all your applications. They're doing all the generative AI that you're using as well to help you run your networks. They're providing the core applications as well. They've not talked about doing the vRAN software, but who knows? I mean,
and they're all quite dominant consumer-facing companies as well.
They're all quite dominant, exactly.
Yeah, so they've got so many strings to their bow. I sometimes get the impression that they're thinking they could completely dominate and wipe everyone out, and they're just being expedient, and they're thinking, no, we've got to keep everyone on life support to create this impression of competition. But it's basically down to us how well they
consumer
all do.
applications and business applications. Microsoft obviously is like massive in the IT space. I mean, their Office software and everything, which is what they started doing. And,
I mean, you've got to imagine that, you know, were European mobile operators to start failing, it would take a very short amount of time for Amazon to jump in and fill that gap.
So we got that covered.
Because it's you know, you can do this with off-the-shelf stuff, and the thing is, even you know say it's heavily unlikely because of, you know, various national ownerships and things like that. But, you know, any of the leading European telcos, if one of them, you know, was to go bust, their stuff doesn't vaporize overnight. You know, Amazon will just nip in, buy it from the administrator for a percentage in the dollar, turn it on the next morning, and then slowly replace it with its own gear, which will then probably have a knock-on effect on the vendor community, because they won't want to pay Ericsson Nokia margins on products.
Yeah.
But could happen.
I mean, I see Telecom Italia as kind of an example of how bad things could potentially get for European telecom. They're kind of like the sick man of Europe, aren't they?
Yeah.
They used to be viewed as one of the big 5, but nobody really talks about the big 5 anymore, because they're selling off all their fixed line assets now under that deal they've done with who's a private equity company that's involved in it?
KKR, was it?
Yeah, but it's partly someone else, isn't it? CDP's involved. I can't even remember the structure.
Did they get rid of the Brazil stuff? Because it was Brazil that made them big for a long time.
I think they've still got
Tim Brazil.
I'm not sure what's going on with Brazil, but they've got the mobile, obviously.
It was a disposal then.
And they've sold off the towers. So the towers and they don't even have I don't even think they have a majority stake in the towers anymore. It's they insist on having control because of the way it's structured, but they're actually not an actual majority owner. They've spun off the fibre network, so they're just kind of basically a service company. And then you think, well, who are the best service companies in the world? They're not, you know, in a sort of online future of doing things in a more e-commercey way. I'm sorry, it's not the telcos. No. It's like, what's kind of left, you know?
It's interesting, and yet, you know, again, you look at this event, look how full it is, you look at how much money must be spent on exhibiting and all that sort of thing.
To my mind, it's kind of obvious that, you know, that the hyperscalers have looked at this and thought, you know, this is complicated, there's very little margin in it. It would take us quite a lot of time to upskill and find out how we're going to do it. It's not worth it. Let's leave the guys in place.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not, you know, I think they're involved as a way of, I don't know, it's almost like looking at Intel being so obsessed with virtual RAN. Like, the amount of money that it makes in the RAN market is pathetic compared with what it makes from selling chips for PCs and data centers. And you kind of look at these things and go, it's an adjunct to what they mainly do, isn't it? But I suppose it's a bit of incremental business for them. It's a lot easier for the hyperscalers because they've got such enormous resources that they can get into the telco landscape, and maybe they see opportunities in, you know, what we were saying, that you can you've got that interface with the customers then, haven't you? Telecom's so important in terms of,
Yeah, that's
what
the
we
interesting
do.
one,
That's
actually, yeah.
it's
That's
like
what they
we
see.
all walk around all day staring at our phones, and
Yep.
I think this is the Rakuten thing. They were an e-commerce company, and I think Mickey Mikitani, the CEO, kind of thought to himself, telecom's so important for people's lives these days. People probably spend more time with their phones than with anything else
Yeah.
they pick up
Yeah.
and handle. There's got to be some way of like leveraging that and using it to my advantage. And I think the hyperscalers maybe are thinking about that in a similar way. And but I don't
Yeah,
know.
and because it is to their advantage, because I honestly believe the mature purchaser of hyperscaler services would prefer and does prefer to go through a third party, because they have someone to manage the stuff for them.
Yeah, yeah.
And that can be the telco, or it can be a systems integrator or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you get into that payment process thing, and Amazon are going to go, actually, I want my money today if you're going to have service today, whereas BT will say, end of the month's fine.
Yeah.
2 months is fine. And I think that's an important value add. It's odd, isn't it, that kind of deferring payment is a telco value add.
There's a hell of a lot of emotional scar tissue from, we don't use the term so much, but certainly 5 or 10 years ago we were talking about OTTs.
Yeah.
Which for people listening who aren't familiar with that, just means over the top. It basically meant other companies making money over the top of the network. And most of the revenue derived from mobile broadband has been by OTTs rather than the operators themselves. And so there is that lingering, we can't let that happen again with whatever the fuck 5G is that we haven't worked out what it is yet. Yeah. And the essence of it is what you two were just saying, that they've still got that customer relationship, they've still got that sort of benign sort of financial flexibility environment and all that sort of thing, and they just got to do a better job of exploiting
The problem with the customer relationship side is that they don't do that very well, do they? It's like I don't think there are very many people that hold their telco provider in particularly high regard. Certainly not in Europe. People don't look at BT and Vodafone and Three, I don't think, with any great sense of excitement that I'm a customer of these companies in the way they do.
The net promoter score is consistently lower than other verticals.
Totally. Like they're interested in being an Apple handset owner. They're interested in being a Netflix subscriber. Those are the brands they get really excited about. Look what I can do with Netflix in the evening. Look what I can do with my Apple handset. But Vodafone, they regard it, and they hate this expression, but they kind of regard them as utilities, I think. But you think about Vodafone, it's probably somewhere between Thames Water and, I don't know, Octopus Energy.
Who I've just switched to because they bought Shell.
Yeah, me too.
That just made me think of EE's quixotic selling fridges thing, which was a big story last year because the FT had gone with that, we thought slightly disingenuous but nonetheless very amusing angle and headline.
I think the headline writer is in here as we speak.
Right, okay. Well,
I don't know if she wrote the headline, the story writer.
But, where they were right, and why I use quixotic, is like, they're sitting there going, how can we redefine our relationship with the customer? Let's get into an area completely outside of our core competence to do with just like selling stuff. Try and be a little Amazon. And I don't think, so we've been talking about big themes of this year. Maybe there's a couple of things I want to do to wrap up because we've only got about something like 15 minutes or so left. It's worth talking about what the conspicuously absent themes. So we did one, IoT hasn't come up that much. I think that EE thing from a year ago, that's just gone quiet. I mean, after that announcement, has anything changed to do with EE and its customer proposition and all that sort of thing?
I'm afraid I don't know.
Not that I've seen. I mean, I am an EE customer.
Yeah, so am I.
You are as well, and I have looked at the app a few times since all of that, and it doesn't look very different to me.
There's no transformation at all.
No.
And I'm certainly not about to buy a fridge off them.
I mean, to be honest, if I was in more consumer-facing journalism, or even on the FT, and having written that headline in the first place, I'd be sort of thinking, this is a good time for one of those opinion pieces. It goes,
that was all bollocks,
how he
wasn't it?
screwed up its consumer refresh or something. I don't know, but
So I'm gonna nominate that as an absent thing, and then the other thing I want to do, and then I'll sort of pass it along, and we'll wrap it up after that. Is also, I'm going to use that hackneyed term, killer app.
Yeah.
But I use it advisedly because it's just concise. We know what it means. We're like, what is the application of the technology that will actually drive revenue, that will drive buzz, that will move things along? And I was chatting to one or two people earlier on today, and they said that we're getting closer and closer to these. You know how they were always talking about how with 5G and the low latency, that one of the killer apps is going to be this VR, AR, XR, something ending in R.
Yep.
And we've always said loads of times on the pod, well, that's bollocks, because VR you're only ever going to use over Wi-Fi because it's an indoor thing. And AR just isn't mature enough. But that will be the ultimate killer app, which, according to this couple of people I've spoken to, seems to be closer than I thought, where you've got these glasses, but they've got a heads-up display. Maybe they've got earbuds as well. And back to the AI thing, earbuds that have got real-time translation and that sort of thing. So that'll be... Those are my two things. What's conspicuously absent is the talk that he was doing last year about becoming a consumer electronics player. But what I think the killer app for telecoms is going to be, when is another matter, is going to be this heads-up display augmented reality thing.
Right.
So yeah, I've actually introduced a bit of structure to the podcast, which I don't normally do.
I don't know, because are you thinking that they things like the Vision Pro or the successors to the Vision Pro, let's say,
I'm talking about your glasses now, with a constant.
But I'm speaking about glasses as a successor to the Vision Pro.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
So, is the idea that a new form factor comes along that operators can make money from because they sell the connectivity to that new form factor?
Yeah.
Well, the problem I have with that is that if it takes off in the way that the smartphone takes off, then people won't use their smartphone. So it just replaces smartphone revenues.
Good point.
And you've got to remember, that's not an operator thing. That technology will come from somebody else.
Yeah.
It'll be Apple.
I mean, they'll have
whoever.
Sure, and someone will have to make money from selling the connectivity bit of it.
Yeah.
But it could just replace what you use. I mean,
and will it be more connectivity? It won't necessarily be more connectivity. It could be less.
Could be.
If our behaviours go from going like that, and it's all just like and haptics and all sorts of weird stuff, that's just a device shift.
Well, William Webb, who we had on the podcast, I think 2 ago or whatever, but he was sort of making the point that he doesn't think AR is all that data hungry. I think he was saying. I don't think I'm misquoting him when he said that.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
This notion that AR is a thing that requires huge amounts of bandwidth
Well,
is
it
actually
happens really
mistaken.
locally, though, doesn't it?
It happens locally, and also if it's very text-based, if it's sort of
device,
coming up with things saying "go here" for
No, you're right,
pizza,
because it's not
then,
like it's streaming video.
Yeah.
Although maybe that'll be an even more utopian use case where you've got this constant video stream over
But
reality.
I think
but
your
the video
problem...
with the compression and technologies that are coming on, I mean, the streaming video is going to be not such a big deal.
It isn't, and also there's your point about you don't want to walk into a lamppost.
No.
So it's going to be. I don't know how you handle doing that.
I personally can't see the appeal, but I'm a sort of 52-year-old man, so I'm probably not a target audience. I can't see the appeal of having a heads-up display on my glasses, where whenever I look at you, it says, "Oh, he's looking a bit knackered" or something, and it gives me some added value.
There's
not that you don't. You look great, mate.
There's like exoskeletons for older workers to enable them to do heavy lifting and stuff that will all. That could be triggered by the glasses. So the glasses will take in the information that that's a heavy bag that the guy's going to lift. So the exoskeleton tenses or whatever it does.
I mean, this is interesting as an IoT thing, though, really, because this is.
I do wander into IoT a lot, I'm afraid. Sorry about that.
But I think it's quite interesting because the problem with the IoT for me, and some of these IoT use cases are a lot better than the kind of smart meters one, which is quite boring and like very low ARPU for the device. Because some of this stuff you could see people. It sounds kind of sexy and futuristic, but people themselves aren't. If they have 20 or 30 connected objects in the home, like exoskeletons to help them get around, or connected glasses, they're not going to spend 30 pounds a month times 30 for the number of devices. Yeah. So it's got to have to be presented as a bundle, in the same way that people are bundling broadband and TV and phone subscriptions. Or someone else is going to have to pay for it.
The washing machine guys who will just put a MBIoT connection in there
for free.
Because the cost's roughly the same as the Wi-Fi stuff now anyway. But users don't connect. This is the interesting thing. I've spoken to a washing machine manufacturer. You have a Wi-Fi enabled washing machine. but 9 times out of 10 the user doesn't connect it to their Wi-Fi
Right.
because there's nothing in it for the consumer.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's
But
the
all
point?
the stuff's in it for the manufacturer.
Right.
So the manufacturer, for like $3 extra, they can have like some cheap cellular connection
Yeah.
embedded that will report back to base about how often you wash your
And it doesn't
floors or
need to be
whatever.
particularly low latency or anything.
No.
It's not like a critical application,
No, there's
is
nothing
it?
critical.
So-
Doesn't matter. Best effort's fine. Ping once a week is plenty. Sorry,
Yeah.
I've digressed it again.
No, not at all. I think I'm going to cut it short because I'm getting vibes off our production people that they got shit to do. So
Going to the pub, I think, is what
yeah,
we're
well,
doing,
quite. So I think, I mean, we've reached a sort of natural point there. So I think I'll wrap it up. Thank you again, George. It's great.
Pleasure.
We just have to make this an annual thing now.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean,
A bit like the G's. We've established the cadence now. We've established the
But
precedent.
next year will be 3G.
So,
I'll get my coat.
so I'll thank you again, and you as ever, Ian. We're now going to go to the Red Hat stand and drink some beer and stay out late again tonight. I'm already fantasising about getting home and getting a decent night's
I've
sleep.
still got another meeting
You've still got another meeting.
in 20 minutes.
Shit.
And then I'm done.
All right, so I will wrap it up there, and thank you both again, and thank you for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.